back to this area. Now,
You notice your auto insurance rates going up? Switching policies can be a simple way to fix that. And with Credit Karma, you can shop.
now, before I go further, let me clarify something I think a lot of people miss when we talk about SIG. Sig Sauer isn't just one company. There are actually 3 separate companies that operate under the SIG name. There's Sig Sauer AG in Switzerland, the original company, Sig Sauer GmbH in Germany, the German sister arm, and Sig Sauer Inc. in New Hampshire. The American company responsible for the P320 and M18. They are legally and operationally distinct. And what they're talking about here, the P320 and all the controversy around it, that's Sig Sauer USA, not the Swiss arm, not the German arm. So don't confuse the entire SIG universe with the specific situation we're dealing with here. This is like Porsche and Volkswagen. Yeah, they're connected under a bigger umbrella, but if a 911 explodes, you're not gonna walk up to a Volkswagen Golf owner and say, yo, what the hell? Same umbrella, totally different product, totally different team. So this conversation, this gun, this lawsuit, this tragedy pertains to Sig Sauer USA, just so we can clear up some of the confusion. Now, I have several Sig Sauer P320s, and I have the M18. I've got one of the first generation P320s. The M18 I liked, but I gush over the X5 variants of the 320. And one of my favorite PDW chassis, the Flux Raider, utilizes the P320 as well. The whole modular chassis thing, the fire control unit swap system, is cool as hell to me. I've got all the original stuff and still do. And that innovation, that's always been SIG's strength. They're a gun company that really pushes limits functionally and visually. If I had to name one brand that's the Apple of the gun world, SIG is the first one that comes to mind. They've always had this fresh, bold take on firearms. So yeah, I'm biased in that regard. I love their products. But I don't jump to conclusions because I've seen what happens. I've been in this game for a bit, long enough to know how dangerous it is to start making bold declarations before all the facts are in, within reason, of course. It's easy, especially online, to just jump in and say, oh, this is what happened after one headline. But I've seen too many cases where people do that, and then a week later, boom, new evidence drops, and everything completely changes. That's why I'm cautious about these types of stories, especially because I've got a good platform. My voice reaches far, so I try to be responsible. Do I think something's going on with the 320? Well, there is a lot of smoke, so that's telling me there's probably a fire. There's clearly something going on with the P320 platform, to some degree. I don't know exactly what the issue is, but there's enough anecdotal evidence out there to make me say I'm probably not carrying a P320 anytime soon. Granted, that's an easy decision for me to make because it's not a gun I carry anyway. Now, the P365, yeah, that's part of my carry rotation. I carry it a lot, and no, I don't have plans to stop. I've run mine ragged and abused it, so it's staying in a rotation for now. But let me be clear, I haven't had issues. The P320 water is murky, and when water is that murky, I'm not swimming in it, at least not on the P320 side of the pool.
Black people don't swim in the pool. I've met you in the pool.
Now, that doesn't mean I'm giving away my P320s. I'm not selling them. I'm not melting them down. But I'm also not carrying them. And honestly, I wasn't really carrying them before, so it's not a huge shift. Now, when it comes to their rifles, especially the MCX line, no issues. The MCX is one of my favorite rifle platforms, and I haven't seen or heard anything that makes me second guess that. No uncommanded discharges, no weird failures. It's solid. So no, I'm not dropping those platforms. In fact, before this all happened, I had a video in the pipeline about how the MCX Spear LT got featured in the show Linus and how much I love that gun, and I got reacquainted to how much I love the gun by watching the show Linus. So I'm still gonna drop that video because it's good content and I'm excited about it. But carrying a gun that might shoot me? Look, I appendix carry. That means every day I've got a gun pointed at my...
Honestly, your third leg was just phenomenal.
That's why this stuff matters. Because I need to trust what I'm carrying fully. Because we carry guns to protect ourselves, not to fear them. It's hard to reconcile the idea that the thing designed to keep you safe might randomly fire and kill you. That cuts at the very core of why we carry a gun in the first place. And for a lot of people, I get it. That is a deal breaker. And I'm not mad at anyone who says, I'm never touching another cig again. I get it. At the end of the day, time tells all. Either this is a one-off tragedy, or it's the tipping point with the 320 design. We live in a time when guns are rolling off the line every week. When you mass produce anything, problems happen. Sometimes small, sometimes catastrophic. That's the risk. And I get the irony of me saying all of this as someone who carries appendix. But even I don't take that lightly. Never point a gun at yourself, even unloaded. I hate it. That's just how I was raised in this community. I'm not blaming the airmen. I'm not implying anything. I'm just saying what I believe. If I got a loaded gun in a holster and I set it down, I don't want it aimed at me, and neither should you. I'm not saying this to Monday morning quarterback, the airman. I'm telling this to anybody else that has a gun and takes off their holster and puts it on the table. That's why I'm saying this.
We begin with the Jeffrey.
Back to another one. I'm going to talk about something that I heard over the weekend where a guy was getting a fitting out of the Force tailor-made rep came out there and was talking about his swing. The guy said that he couldn't break 120 no matter what he could do. He accepted it. He said, you know what, that's just kind of my skill level, and I'm fine with that. However, when he saw his swing, it was not that of somebody that did not have the technical skill to break 120. In fact, he could probably break 80 with that. So we're going to talk about why people struggle with their high school.
Want to know the secrets of golf? I'll teach it to you in less than 20 minutes with a series of graphics. My name is John Sherman. I'm the author of the best-selling book. Want to know the secrets of golf? I'll teach it to you in less than 20 minutes with a series of graphics. My name is John Sherman. I'm the author of the best-selling book, The 4 Foundations of Golf, co-host of the Sweet Spot podcast, and PGA Tour coach. Every golfer thinks birdies are the path to lower scores. They're not. It's actually less double bogeys. If you look at this chart from ShotScope, you can see that lower handicaps are only averaging at most 2 birdies around. But if you start looking down towards normal handicaps at the 10, 15, and 20 handicap level, you'll see that they make way more birdies. And birdies aren't even really part of the equation. Most golfers are going to average less than 1 birdie per round, but the real difference in performance is those bigger blow-up holes. So once you start hanging your hat on having less of those, your scores are going to absolutely plummet. Scoring at golf is primarily determined by tee shots and approach shots. Golfers of all levels separate themselves more with their driver and irons than with their wedges and putter. If you look at this chart from ShotScope, they did a really interesting study comparing PGA Tour players to handicaps from scratch all the way through 25. And you'll see that they're all losing strokes compared to tour players, of course. But what's interesting is where they lose the most strokes. Those are absolutely with their irons. Those are the biggest losses compared to tour players. So if you want to get your game in the right direction and lower your scores the most, it's primarily going to be driven, no pun intended, by your driver and irons. It's the truth about scoring that everyone needs to know, and I definitely recommend reading Mark Brody's book, Every Shot Counts. If you want to become a better ball striker, it's going to come down to 3 things, and you always hear this if you listen to my podcast, The Sweet Spot. Where are you striking it on the club face? How's your ground contact? And where is the club face pointing and impact, also known as club face control? So when you're practicing, you want to keep track of these 3 things. Where am I striking it on the club face? You can use a product like Dr. Scholl's Odor X spray to track where you're striking it on the driver or your iron's face. Next, you'll want ground contact feedback. This is so hard to do because most of us are practicing in artificial turf. That's why you always hear me talk about a product called the divot board. It's a great way to get feedback when you're in artificial turf. But if you do have access to a grass driving range, You can always leave something right next to the ball, like a tee marker, or you can spray a line with your foot spray, just to give you a visual representation of where your divots are taking place and where you're initiating contact with the ground. And lastly, with club face control, you really want to think about the start line of your golf ball. That is primarily determined about whether your face is too open or closed at impact. So I'm always thinking about these three things with every shot I'm hitting on the practice range or even when I'm playing golf. If I had to explain how to become a better putter in a very simple way, it's this. You have to learn how to make more putts inside of 10 feet. But once you get outside of that range, it's mostly about speed control and limiting 3 putts. If we look at this graph of 1 putt percentage makes at different skill levels, you'll see that PGA Tour players are only 50% from 8 feet. That's kind of the line in the sand. Once we see scratch golfers and even 90 shooters, those numbers start going down dramatically. So your best chance of becoming a better putter is increasing these odds inside of 10 feet. Of course, you're not going to make all of them. But more importantly, once you start getting outside of 20 feet, you'll start to see that 3-putt percentages start skyrocketing for higher handicaps. So I like to tell people, if you want to become a better putter and lower your scores quickly, you're going to have to focus on your speed control when you practice. This is a low-hanging fruit for a lot of players to reduce 3 putts from those 20, 30, and even 40-foot distances. Traditional stats are very poor predictors of performance on the course. Stats like fairways hit and putts per round just don't give you enough information. If you told me you only had 30 putts in a round, I have no idea what score you shot or even how well you putted. And if you told me you hit 60% of your fairways, I also have no idea how well you did off the tee. The only traditional stat that's worth keeping track of, and more importantly, building your game around, is greens in regulation. It is a direct correlation to scoring potential. If you look at these stats from ShotScope, as handicap drops and gets lower, people are hitting more greens. I always tell people, build your golf game around hitting more greens in regulation. It's the one stat that you can rely on to dictate your scoring potential. If we're talking about successful tee shots, as I said, fairways hit is not a great predictor of scoring. But what we do want to keep track of is how are you avoiding the big trouble? And more importantly, how big of a penalty this is. ShotScope came out with this image a few years ago. Using strokes gained analysis, they're able to show what type of penalties you can expect off the tee. What I found most interesting about this was that the big trouble caused a disproportionate damage to scoring. So treat almost a 1.5 stroke penalty for golfers at most levels. But what's even more interesting is that the light rough is not that big of a penalty. Yes, we obviously want to hit more fairways, but your ability to keep the ball in play and get it in the light rough is even more important for your scoring, so that you're avoiding the quote-unquote big trouble. Here's another big one. Scoring with your irons and wedges is not about knocking down pins and getting it inside of 10 feet. I used to play this way, and I was so disappointed every time I hit a shot outside of that distance. More importantly, I was making horrible mistakes. This is for millions of golf shots and real shots on courses from golfers of all levels. You can see that the proximity from various yardages at different handicap levels is much larger than we think. If you look at a scratch golfer from 75 to 125 yards, we're only getting the ball about 40 feet from the hole. So you really need to retrain your mind to think that good shots with your irons or wedges are absolutely about getting it on the putting surface. If you can do that, you've achieved a huge goal and increased your chances of making a stress-free par. And more importantly, making a bogey at worst. And when you do miss the green,